Hi, I'm NASA astronaut Alvin Drew. I've flown 2 space shuttle missions to the International Space Station, and on my second mission, I got a chance to read the story, Max Goes to the Moon, to the children of the planet Earth. When I was growing up, I dreamt of becoming an astronaut while watching the Apollo missions to the moon. How many of you dream of becoming astronauts when you grow up? Maybe someday some of you will live and work on the moon, or even travel out to the planet Mars. Enjoy the story, Max Goes to the Moon.
Look, I can see the moon. I wonder how high it is. Do you think we could touch it? What are those dark patches? They look like big polka dots.
People have always been able to look up at the moon in our sky. And they've always wondered, what would it be like to go there? But until quite recently, such a trip seemed no more than an impossible dream. An impossible dream. An impossible dream. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy laid down a challenge.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
8 years later, we were on our way.
5, 4,
People around the world gathered around television to watch the first human steps on another world. And Neil Armstrong's words made it clear that the trip belonged to the entire human race. Over the next 3 years, 5 more Apollo missions successfully landed on the moon, raising the total number of people who have ever walked on another world to 12. But then, the visits suddenly stopped. No one has been to the moon since the astronauts of Apollo 17 returned home in December 1972. Isn't it time we go back? Before we begin, let me tell you just a bit about the story. The story is fiction, of course, but it's all based on real science. Everything that happens in the story could happen the same way for real. And even the artwork shows what things might really look like on the moon. The artist even used real models for the characters. Tori, who you see here, was in middle school at the time. And Max was a real dog, a 120-pound Rottweiler who was as sweet as could be and who had a real sense of adventure that would have made him love a trip to the moon. He was also the only dog we've ever met who wouldn't eat a steak unless you first cut it into small pieces for him. So with that introduction to our characters, it's time for the story of how Max the dog helped people return to the moon, this time to stay. It all began on the morning of the parade. Max had just returned from his trip to the space station. As Max's car drove along Pearl Street, Max looked to the west, and he began to howl just as the moon set over the mountains. In truth, Max howled because he heard a siren. He always howls at sirens. But the TV reporters didn't know that, so they thought he was howling at the moon. A reporter spotted Max's friend Tori. "Why did Max howl at the moon?" he asked. "I'm not sure," said Tori. "Maybe it's because he wants to go there."
Wait! Don't turn the page yet. I'm curious about that moon. You see how it's not quite a full moon, but definitely more than half? What do we call it when it looks like that?
Good question. You know the moon goes through phases, right?
Yeah, from new to full and back again. How long does that cycle take again?
That's actually easy to remember. The word month comes from the cycle of phases, as you can see by adding an extra O to it. The cycle from new to full and back again takes about 29 and a half days. Very close to a month.
Just think moon.
That's a good way to remember it. Well, we give the phases names based upon the shape that we see for the moon in the sky. I'm sure that you know this one.
That's called a full moon.
You probably know this one too.
That's called a crescent.
Yep. Now, notice that the moon in the painting is actually the opposite of a crescent. Instead of a thin part that's bright, with all of the rest dark, it has a thin part that's dark, with all of the rest bright.
I see. But what's it called?
It's called a gibbous moon, and I want you to remember it.
Why?
Because we see the gibbous moon a lot. Each month we see it in the evening, a few days before full moon, and in the morning, a few days after full moon. But for some strange reason, hardly anyone seems to know its name. So, you can help spread the word.
That's a gibbous moon.
By the way, the word gibbous means hunched back.
I see. Look how the moon kind of looks hunched over.
Right. Now, don't forget, next time you see the moon looking like that in the sky, grab your parents and say, "Mom, Dad, that's called a..."
Gibbous moon.
Okay, let's get back to our story now. They thought that Max had howled at the moon, and Tori said that maybe it's because he wants to go there.
Well, Tori's maybe was good enough for TV. By the next day, Max's dream of going to the moon was all over the news. And because no one had been to the moon in a long time, it seemed like it was about time for someone, or some dog, to go. It's not easy to go to the moon. It takes big rocket engines to get a spaceship off Earth. It takes careful planning to make sure the astronauts reach the moon and come back safely. And it costs a lot of money. But everywhere Max went, Crowds chanted, "Send Max to the moon!" People wrote letters to the president. So, a new moonship was built and assembled at the space station.
Is that the moon ship down at the bottom?
Yes, you can see the 4 legs it will use to land on the moon.
Why are they building it at the space station?
We don't have to. And NASA is actually considering plans that would take us direct from the Earth to the moon, just like in the Apollo era. But in this story, we assembled the moon ship at a space station. The most expensive part of any space mission is getting from the ground to Earth orbit. And the more stuff you send up, the more it costs. So, by stopping at a space station, we could send the moon ship back and forth to the moon without having to launch it from the ground each time.
Tori gave Max the good news. "You are going to go to the moon," she said. "I sure hope they let me come with you."
How big is the moon?
It's a lot smaller than Earth, as you can see in these pictures that compare the sizes. But it's still pretty big. The moon is almost 3,500 kilometers in diameter, which means its circumference is almost 11,000 kilometers. That's close to 7,000 miles, or more than twice the distance across the United States.
So that means the Apollo astronauts only explored a really tiny bit of the moon.
That's right.
Max went into astronaut training again. The other astronauts were glad to have Max back. Max made the long training session seem fun.
Fetch, Max.
Somehow, he always managed to find a stick.
Good boy, Max.
He loved to play